starting around 1950, police and taxi operators could buy alternators in their Mopars, in their Plymouths and Dodges, but other people couldn't. Later on, they started adding them to power wagons, but still an option. Why? Because they were expensive, because they were big, because they used more energy from the engine than the old standby generators. But the good thing about an alternator is that they can be higher capacity and they last longer because all the current's not going through the brushes, and they can charge even when idle. So what Glenn Farrison did is, for the 1960 Chrysler alternators, is he figured out a way to use diodes as an efficient rectifier to go from the alternator's alternating current to the direct current that the car can actually use. So they started out with just 30 amps, which isn't a whole lot, and then they increased the amperage year by year quite rapidly for a while. If you wanted an alternator that was 60 amps or above, then they still bought least level alternators as they had before they made their own. But the 1960 Valiant was the first car in the world to have a standard alternator. Every single one had them. From 1962 on, they switched to a new redesign, but they still had one brush connected to a terminal and the other to the housing because it was easier to work with the electromechanical voltage regulator that way. Other than one big alternator in 1969, which was a special unit with a weird 3-terminal voltage regulator, they went to the electronic voltage regulator in 1970 and had a new round-back alternator with just 2 terminals, one attached to each brush. It was more efficient that way, and they could get more power out of it. In 1972, they had the new, more reliable squareback, which was designed for easier assembly and service. So the earlier ones had to press and solder 6 diodes. In the new squareback, they had 2 diode packs, which didn't need to be soldered or pressed. So if you want to retrofit an older car, you need to use the flat pack electronic 1970 and up voltage regulator, which is really cheap. By 1975, Chrysler had a full 100 amp alternator, which was actually good for 117 amps at maximum output. The pinnacle was 1987, when they had a new alternator at 120 amps peak output, 50 amps at idle. And they were actually smaller than the 100 amp, but bigger than the original squareback. They were a completely new design, but they ended in 1989, and after that, Chrysler bought all their alternators. It was the end of a long and happy story. For more, including some more details on how they work and how to date them, go to Motels. Don't forget to come back to Motels.com, where we have more details on this story and far more stories of Chrysler technology and history and people and technology and how they did things. So come back to Motels.com.